So we will get started, and if folks join us afterwards, they can come in a little late. So yeah, if you can please just make sure you've got your microphones and your cameras switched off for me. Um, and yeah, welcome everyone. Good evening on probably the chilliest of evenings we have hosted on for a while. Winter really has just arrived in style, hasn't it? But I have hot tea and a warm jumper and the cozy glow of historical exploration to battle the cold. Thank you so much for joining us for the latest in our Kent Archaeological Society Zoom lecture series. We're in that strange liminal period between my birthday and Christmas, where I spend most of my time hearing about the latest Barbie dolls and Hot Wheels that Santa is going to be filling my house with. So it's nice to escape into an evening of historical intrigue. But that said, if you're thinking, oh dear, I haven't asked Santa for anything yet, why not check out our snazzy new online store that we have on our website? We've got Kent Archaeological Society hoodies and coats and mugs, t-shirts, a wide range of books, and a whole lot more available. So if you keep your eyes open for those and on exclusive festive deals that we've got coming up. Um, if you're not a member of the society, please do think about joining us or even giving the gift of membership for Christmas to someone. It works out about £3.30 a month, less than a pack of deluxe mince pies. And for that, you'll receive a copy of our yearly journal, Archaeologia Cantiana, full of the most current historical and archaeological research in the county. You'll also receive our quarterly magazine, regular updates, exclusive access to our collections, conferences, and selected events, opportunities to get involved with excavations and research projects, and you'll allow us to continue putting out content such as these free online talks, outreach in schools, community groups, seminars, and all the things that bring the benefit of Kent history and heritage to everyone. So check out the website for details on how you can become a member. We do have some exciting volunteer projects starting soon with our collections and our archive, our library, and digital content. So if you're interested in getting involved, just send me or the team an email, and we will be happy to have you. And if there are any keen footballers out there, I'm looking for Kent players for an upcoming archaeological football tournament. So do get in touch if you fancy it. Dust off those old boots. We could use the players. So remember, if you missed any of our earlier talks, you can venture back and watch all the incredible lectures we have so far on our YouTube channel and on the website. So please do go back and check those all out. As always, we hope to avoid any technical issues, but do bear with us if there are any problems. Jacob is bound to be able to steer us through. So, quick run through the housekeeping. The talk will last for about an hour, after which we'll have time for questions if you have any. Please keep yourself on mute with your cameras off throughout the talk so we can hear our speaker clearly. During the Q&A, you can either use the raise hand feature and we'll unmute you when it's your turn to ask your question personally, or if you prefer, you can type your question in the chat box and I will read it out for you. I hope it goes without saying, but please be courteous and polite to our speaker and to each other. We will be recording the session and it may be posted to our video channels in the future, but no personal data will be shared. And if you ask a question but would prefer it not to be published, just send us an email, let us know, and we'll make sure it's not included. So, on to our speaker. Alexander Reed is an experimental archaeologist and a bronze caster with a long and successful relationship with the Kent Archaeological Society. Alex completed his undergrad at the University of Kent and more recently graduated from the Experimental Archaeology Masters at the University of Exeter with a high first-class award for his dissertation. His thesis involved creating a replica of an early medieval sword from Sarre, which is part of the Society collection housed at Maidstone Museum, which he will discuss more with us this evening. He recently got to travel to China to guest lecture on ancient bronze working. And from what I hear, he managed to charm his way into like a backstage viewing, access all areas dream tour of the Terracotta Army. So that sounds pretty cool. Alex started his journey into experimental archaeology at Butser Ancient Farm, leading to various experiences, such as sleeping in Iron Age roundhouses, which were apparently much colder and smokier than he expected. He also conducted a Roman hypercaust experiment, which needed nearly a week of continuous fire stoking to reach a reasonable temperature. Alex now runs a business creating archaeological replicas and is an active experimental bronze caster, giving talks and demonstrations of the art. We've been privileged to host some of Alex's presentations, and it really is an incredible experience to behold. If you're interested in seeing more of his replica works, his Etsy shop can be found via the Kent Archaeological Society website in the shop section. I'm sure Jacob can pop a link in the chat for us. Alex was formerly the UKC student ambassador for the Society and remains an important figure in our work, outreach, and research. He very kindly donated his replica sword to the Society to form part of our education and outreach collection. And he rightly suggested, you cannot understand how something was made without trying to make it. So I'm delighted to welcome Alex here with us tonight to give a glimpse into this fascinating world. Alex, it is over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Craig. That's an excellent plug for my Etsy as well. Got to get it in somehow. So, yeah, that's a little bit about me. And this topic will be making an early Saxon sword. Like Craig said, this is one from Sarre, so local to Kent as well, as many of you will know. So we'll start off with experimental archaeology. This is the whole reason why this replica was made, and Craig has touched on it a little bit, but we'll just start out with a little bit of background. Some of you might have heard about it, some of you might know what experimental archaeology is, even seen some of my demonstrations, but here's a little bit of background for you. Experimental archaeology is quite a new way of thinking about archaeological artifacts, and some of them can be a couple thousand years old, some of them can be very recent. It all stems from wanting to understand more about the object. You might know what it is, you might have no clue what it is, but either way, there is always something new you can learn, not just about the object, but about everything that surrounds it. Here's a little bit of phraseology for you. Chaîne opératoire. Some of you here already laughing at hearing that phrase a million times. But this part's full of the object biography. We can make reproductions to test archaeological hypotheses. You might have this Roman artifact which has just been dug up, and you have no clue what it is. And you might go, well, if I try making it, you might understand something a little bit more about the object. You might end up thinking, well, this object has a completely wrong mechanical construction for what it's used about. Think about some Roman bricks. They might be made of a very weak type of cement, and everyone's saying, well, bricks, they've got to be used in a building. But if they're not strong enough, they might be decorational instead. It's this sort of critical thinking about questioning absolutely everything that comes up out the ground, whether they're brand new, whether they've been dug up ages ago and already been given a label, to try and agitate a bit more discourse and critical thinking about them. And the subject I chose from this was one of the amazing Anglo-Saxon swords from the cemetery in Sarre. This is a bit of a simplified flowchart of how these experimental archaeology experiments try to replicate what happened when the object was made. This is the chaîne opératoire, or the operation chain. Everything from how someone, for example, made a flint tool, from the raw material, selecting the rocks, to making the object, and also how the object was used throughout its lifetime and then eventually discarded. And if you think of a flint tool, that might have been used well, you have no clue how long they've been used for. It might have been retouched over a couple of years. Some of these also seem to be really treasured artifacts that have been passed down through generations. And take technical know-how, certainly. I've tried flint knapping and it's a lot harder than it looks. But through doing the flint knapping, you start to pick up on little things. You look at a pile of flint debitage and you go, oh, I recognise that. I made that last time I tried it. This is where it's come from. It's not the tool itself, it's a byproduct of making the tool. Then when you start to have these insights into the object, you start to look at the whole archaeological site differently. If you have a pile which is full of flint debitage rather than finished flint artifacts, you go, oh, was this just a prehistoric trash pile for this single flint napper or a group of flint nappers on their way to reduce a few chunks of rock before they took them back to their settlement to be used or refined further? So that's a little bit of background on experimental archaeology as a practice, and it's been rightly turned into a brilliant master's course at Exeter University, amongst one or two others in Europe, but unfortunately is closing now. And I was lucky enough, along with some of my classmates, to do this before it closed. So here we have some of the methods used in experimental archaeology. It's not just the practical go and get your hands dirty that you can do. There is a lot of scientific rigor that goes through balancing out the quantifiable and the qualitative. And at Exeter University, we are lucky enough to have access to a whole lab of really expensive high-tech tools which can help inform the actual object. As the Kent Archaeological Society has done a few times, like using X-rays to see through intact jars, which otherwise we wouldn't be able to see what was in them without breaking them open. So this non-destructive, non-invasive scanning techniques are very useful. Some of them I've used in my experiment include radiography, the taking of X-rays, or PXRF, or in common English, portable X-ray fluorescence, which, for those who don't know, allows you to determine the elemental composition of an object just by scanning it for a few seconds, which is an absolutely invaluable tool, especially when you're dealing with metals. So you can make sure that what's been assumed to be this type of metal is correct, and it also informs on your reproductions, so you get the closest match possible. And on top of this, the Saxon period is very, very interesting, along with Roman as well, and to a lesser extent medieval, because you have the availability of documentary comparison. There are some Anglo-Saxon documents which surprisingly help me understand different parts of the sword and just double check this was done the way it was done. Of course, there's only a handful of these sort of 5th, 6th century AD documents left in the whole world, and you have got to treat them with a pinch of salt, because they're writing almost poetically about something which is definitely not. But you can see the appeal when you see the finished product. Another thing you can use in experimental archaeology is an ethnographic analogy. This is less useful for this exact project because you don't see many people out in mud huts hand hammering a sword to be used to slay your enemies and win treasure for your king. There are interestingly a few workshops, especially in more rural communities, maybe in rural Africa or India, which still use some of these laminating steel techniques because the materials they have available aren't of the highest quality. So, just like the Saxons did, they had to try and find a way to spread out this small amount of very high quality steel amongst a much larger amount of low quality body steel. This gives you some reference of where Sarre is in Kent. It's right up on the northeast side of the county. The other cemetery which the KAS does have items or is Bifrons. This is a bit further inland, but on top of that we also have Broadstairs, which is a contemporary early Anglo-Saxon cemetery, which some items are floating around from as well. This is another one of the very interesting but a bit number soupy type technologies we can use, which is the SEM, or scanning electron microscope. It's just a really high powered microscope, which if you have a trained eye, you can figure out what different items are just by looking at them, even if there's only a very, very, very small amount left on there, maybe tucked away inside a clump of rust, which is otherwise invisible by the naked eye. You can zoom in on it, you can just make out traces, maybe a couple microns long of hair, even from 1500 years ago, which is absolutely incredible and very much helps a reproduction. So, like I said, Sarre and Bifrons, they're mostly held at Maidstone Museum, which is a wonderful place. If you do get the chance to visit, you might even see my reproduction there as well. These are all around 5th to the 6th, 7th century AD. The cemetery covers a couple of hundred years, all the way from very late Roman-ish materials that have been adapted, reused, taken by basically one of the first generations of the Anglo-Saxon settlers, or more accurately, Jutish settlers in Kent. Right on the coast, as you can see, it's not going to be very far inland, maybe a couple of miles. This helps me sort of narrow in about what I actually want to achieve with this reproduction. Through looking at some of the background, what materials do we know was in this cemetery? Yeah, there's a few swords, there's a few pommels. Is that it? What else can I find? Well, I have to bring out the big guns and heavy machinery to try and figure out the rest myself. Now, this is the sort of technology that we're looking at. This is on the left here a diagram of the Sutton Hoo sword, which is roughly about the same sort of time period, but much, much more elaborate. There is a good reason why it's world famous. And you can see it's very sophisticated technology for something which has been described as the Dark Age. If you have a look at Roman swords a couple hundred years earlier, they're, much less sophisticated than this, unless you get a centurion's triumphal display piece. They're made from half a dozen different materials, all stacked on top of each other. And the craftsmen or craftspeople who did this knew very much why each piece was on the sword and how to make them, how they fit together, and how it all looks as a finished product. And on the right here we have a little excerpt from the original mid-late 1800s report of the graves of Sarre, and as you can see it is very Victorian, and you can see that they were prioritizing, ooh, this is shiny, I'm going to write about that, everything else is backlined. If you have a really nice ivory gambling piece, yeah, let's give it lots of sketches and write a whole paragraph about it. But at the bottom, if it's only a lump of rust, we'll call it a sword, 37 inches, that's it. So some of these is a bit of a pain to try and tie up. This is what the author from almost 200 years ago was talking about, and this is it today. Are they actually the same object? And it turns out some of them aren't. Very helpfully, different graves have been different numbers over time as you reread these transcriptions and try and sort them out yourself, as I'm sure Andy, the curator, has had a lovely time trying to do. Now, the hardest part in making the sword was figuring out what sword to actually make. There's a few rather complete swords in the collection, which I had the pleasure of sorting through and going, ooh, this is a nice sword, ooh, this is an even better sword. And then on top of that, you've got the pommels, which are the end bits, the counterbalance you might have heard under a different name, stored separately to the sword. So like I said, trying to marry up the old 1800s description of the graves with the pommels that came with them and the sword that came with them is a bit of a pain, and you've got to try and use some liberties to try and match them up. And as I can show later, there are different methods of proving which items belong with which. So one of the struggles with an Anglo-Saxon sword is just how poorly they have kept, how bad they've preserved over time. There are some parts of it which have miraculously survived, like on this far left image, just above the crossguard, the hilt, you can see there is some wood of the scabbard that is surrounding the sword, not to be confused with a sheath. A sheath is a soft leather covering of something really no bigger than a knife. A scabbard is a hard cover with hard pieces of wood wrapped up in leather. And that, on the previous slide, is you can even be able to tell what type of wood it is with the scanning electron microscope. You can, I don't know how they do it, I'm not that smart, but you can figure out what type of wood it is as well, which is absolutely brilliant. With the pommels, you can see why the Victorians loved them so much. They are absolutely wonderful pieces of balance between form and function. Their function is to counterbalance the big lump of steel, which the sword is, but the way you can do it is absolutely stunning. These are the famous early Anglo-Saxon ring pommels with some interesting different designs. In the middle, you've got what's been called a zoomorphic or a swan-like design, or crow. The Anglo-Saxons loved birds and their symbology, but also on the far right, you have a pommel which has a swastika on it, which is absolutely brilliant because it shows this connection with the Far East and India and Buddhist symbology, which you just don't expect. In an early Anglo-Saxon cemetery, you would have thought, oh, the Romans are left, it's a bit of chaos, it's the Dark Ages, there are no trade routes. Well, no, actually, how are they getting this then? Have they seen it on a 200-year-old Roman ruin? Or are they actually sending traders down the Silk Road into China and India and that sort of area? That's brilliant. But even better, there is a little bit of surviving organic residue in the middle of that sort of gloopy, off-white, beige looking blob. And we will talk more about that later. But this poses a question: how old are these objects? Can you trust what the Victorians said when they first dug them out? Oh, on another note, the Victorians were very good at one thing, and that is classifying. They believed that everything in the world can be classified, and if it can be classified, it needs to be. If you think about all of the advances in natural sciences that the Victorians made, that is one thing they did do very well. And although the ages have changed a little bit with modern introductions like C14 carbon isotope dating, refined by maybe 50 years, maybe even 10 years, you can tell by the different styles. But the classifications that they're in still holds water to this day, which is also very useful. But this is why I selected this sword. I think it is KAS number 828 because it is one of the oldest in the collection. Now we will get into some of the scientific techniques used on analysing these items before I even draw up a game plan of reproducing them. I've got a number of different techniques which I can use, supported by the university, like the X-ray fluorescence machine, not portable SEM or radiograph X-ray machine, but they're all still there to be used. And we'll take one of these pommels as an example. This is one of the Sarre pommels just lying around separate from a sword, and from a look you'd say, oh, that's some sort of copper alloy, but that's about it. Is that glass? Is that a jewel that's inlaid into the middle? That's about it. However, with the use of a portable X-ray fluorescence machine, you can figure out that copper alloy is bronze. And why is that useful? Well, it shows that they've got access to copper, tin, lead, and some other things. And by looking at the impurities, you can tell how advanced their refinement of these raw materials was, along with being able to date it loosely by the style on the pommel. But also, you then start to think about, oh, can you apply that to other materials as well, like that stone in the middle? Turns out, yes, you can. You can use the XRF machine. This is the readout that it gives you on that stone in the middle, and by looking at these results and filtering out some of the contaminations from the rust on the sword, from the silver from the hilt, you can figure out that is no stone, it's not a garnet, it is in fact glass. And that gives you another interpretation on this pommel, going back to the Roman subject from earlier, because these are very early Anglo-Saxons, you go, oh, the Romans were big glass makers. Did the Anglo-Saxons make this glass themselves? Which is a very sophisticated and high intensity, high resource consumption specialized activity, or were they going around to Roman ruins and collecting this glass to be used in their swords? Which I think is a fascinating and brilliant interpretation. And going back to the first couple of slides, the chaîne opératoire, the object biography of this item, has just been expanded that little bit more. We also have X-rays, and then you look at that compared to the lump of rust which is in the museum's boxes, and you go, ooh, what's that pattern there? And that is a so-called herringbone pattern of pattern welded steel. You might have heard of that as Damascus steel or pattern steel or whatever it is. It is different types of iron which have been welded together through extreme heat and pressure to create this very nice pattern, which is encouraged through etching with acids. This specific pattern of creating a herringbone is achieved through getting 2 bars of steel. Each are twisted separately and then hammered together, and almost in a way that one might do rope work or crochet. It's the same sort of idea, but as well as a very nice pattern where you can pull out the sword and go, oh, that looks nice. It also serves a very important basic idea of function. These are pieces of necessity. Pattern welding was first thought to have been invented by the Celts, who had very small amounts of very high quality steel and lots of very low quality steel. So what you can do is, if you wanted to make a scythe for harvesting your grain, rather than sharpen it every 5 minutes with your low quality steel or even iron, you can then weld a bar of good steel on the cutting edge of your plough or on the cutting edge of your scythe, whatever you're using, and then that gives you a way to make the material last a lot longer. You can do this with swords. If you have a low quality core and then a high quality cutting edge, it's the same thing with Japanese katanas. It's what made them so famous. But the difference is they have 2 separate layers. You can see they're 2 separate ones, but in Damascus steel, pattern welded, they're mixed thoroughly. And this thorough mixing gives a chance for the good steel to be spread as much throughout the item as possible, so you don't get a weak point and a strong point. Everything averages out and the whole average quality is a lot better, which is very important for a warrior, especially if you're in a fight with someone and you're swinging your sword and it hits someone else's or it hits someone's shield. You don't want it to hit the soft part of the steel in your sword, which would then bend, and then you've got a useless sword. Through spreading this throughout the item, you have a much more reliable weapon, which is a technical and form-based achievement, which is very impressive. Here's some some numbers for all of you, because I know you're dying for the dirty details. These are some of the XRF results showing the different quantities of elements throughout the items in the KAS Sarre catalogue. These include the jeweled parts, the silver, the pommels, as well as the sword blades themselves. And if I can draw your attention to the sword parts on the lower half, you might be interested in seeing the different impurities in different parts of the sword. And of course, where these are pattern welded, made up of different types of steel, depending on where you decide to analyze, you will get different results. And obviously in some of these low quality sections, you get large amounts of impurities. There's a part of the sword, KS 838, which is only 92% iron, and the rest is made up of impurities, which is absolutely astonishing to have something which has almost not been refined at all. It even has traces of titanium, tungsten, nickel, and silicon in the material. And all of these are definitely not what you want on a high performance item. It's like having an old car which is just made up of steel, just a lump of iron. It's not very good, it's really heavy, and then if you get hit somewhere, you know it's going to break. But some of these are very, very high quality items, have almost no impurities, and seems to be quite homogeneous. But that's the swords. Can we see the same about the silver or the bronze parts that adorned the swords? And the simple answer is, well, there's a great deal of variety. For example, those who don't know, AG is silver, and for each different part of the sword's construction, you are getting a different amount of silver, which says, are these made by different workshops which have their own special recipe, which are then all brought from around the county or country or even continent to be used in this one item? Or are they tailoring the recipe? Is it one single workshop tailoring the recipe to the different parts of the sword which require different material benefits? By adding the amount of copper in silver, it makes the silver harder. So for something like a rivet, you want that to be slightly harder, but not too hard, because you've still got to squash the head of the rivet over to seal it. But if you just have a large amount of volume to occupy in the pommel, what's the amount of silver, or the least amount of silver that you can get away with without making it look like something else? If you're trying to flog this item to a rich nobleman, you're going to, oh yes, this is very pure silver. Well, actually, it's only 80%. So these are the different aspects of an object to consider before you even start thinking about the reproduction. And of course, this will inform the reproduction directly, because in trying to get as close to these original recipes as you can ensure that you have an accurate and more faithful reproduction of the original. So this is my sword beginning to take form. The first thing to consider, the sort of meat of the dish, is the blade itself. This is the thing that everyone will see and everyone will judge you by. So What we have here, as I've gone over before, is the composite strategy of making pattern welded steel. And of course, if you hear anyone talk about Damascus steel, technically it is the same thing, but it's only made in Damascus. It's a bit like calling any fizzy wine you see champagne. It's the same concept. But also, when you shave away all of that rust, what shape actually is the sword? The X-ray only gives you a two-dimensional image, unless you've got a very fancy shard 3D scanner, like at the university. Hint, hint. And one of the things is, you can tell the cross-section of the blade. And this is another way you can date the swords, just by the formation of the blades. As all technologies advance, they get more refined, and you can see the age relation to the technology. That's the same thing with swords. Early Anglo-Saxon swords were quite large, quite thick, and had a lenticular cross-section, a lens-shaped blade. And this was presumably because they had lower quality steel. Even through pattern welding, they wanted the blade to be more robust, rather than a thin razor blade, which is made from very high quality steel. They were obviously worried about the material bending, so they had to reinforce it somehow. And throughout the length of the blade, it remains rather similar. So you have a 80 something centimeter long sword, which is all very consistent. If you have a look at the elegant, highly refined fencing swords of the later medieval period, they have a very, very distinct taper. And they can afford this taper, this thinning of the blade, because they have trust in their materials. They have a much high quality item of crucible steel, very homogeneous and high quality steel. And so, of course, with the help of very authentic steam powered hammers in the workshop, we have the creation of the billets of steel. In the top center, we have the twisting of the bars of the different types of iron which are forge welded together. And on the right, we have the lengthening and thinning of the billet of steel to the desired specifications. It's about 5 centimeters wide all throughout the sword, and about 80 centimeters long, to give you some perspective just of the steel. But as you can see in the bottom section of this right hand photo, as raw items, unfinished, they are like any other piece of steel. They have no pattern in them. And you have got to encourage this pattern out of the blade. The different types of steel, you can see, have different colours, and using an acid to etch them out, I used a modern alternative because it wouldn't take days and instead took a few hours. But ye olde craftsmen probably would have used something acidic like a strong vinegar. You could even use rainwater, which oxidizes the blade but turns it red, then rusts and weakens it over time. But you still get the pattern through that. Using one of these modern materials as well is good for a teaching collection like of the KAS, because it's stable. And you can have children come up and touch the blade and go, "Ooh, that looks pretty," without having to worry about re-oiling it every 5 minutes or having to reapply another coat of acid to re-etch the blade. The other part of the sword is the dueling. It's creating the pommels, and these are probably worth a whole study in and of themselves. They are very sophisticated pieces of very fine jewellery. And these probably would have been made by a jeweller instead of the blacksmith or the craftsman, which was responsible for the rest of the sword. And through this, tried a few different techniques. On the left, we have the creation of the pommel. We have bronze casting, which gives you one possible technique of how the bronze pommels were created, because they were a lot harder than the steel ones and a lot thicker than the silver ones. Or in the bottom photo, bottom left, we have the process of raising, which is by getting out a thin silver sheet, you can have a former, a wooden model of your pommel, and you can then hammer this sheet of thin silver around it until you get a shape required. And of course, you can tell this in the archaeological record, because as you hit something with a hammer, you stretch it out through the object. So you will get different sections of silver which are much thinner than others, and then you can sort of recreate how the craftsman constructed this item, because whatever's been hit is thinner, and then you can say, okay, he was using this type of former, he was using this type of hammer, and this is how you got your final item. But adding to this composite material construction, we also have a load of different materials. Using this scanning electron microscope from a past study, on the right hand side we have the different materials that have been found on the pommel. We have different parts of an animal. We have the bone at the top part, which gives you a sort of spacer in between these different parts, and also horn at the bottom right. It's only cow horn, but it gives you a different demonstration of the materials that these craftspeople were working with. And if you refer to this diagram in the middle, it shows how the different materials were stacked on top of each other and eventually formed. We have the rivets holding two sheets of metal, and sandwiched in between those two sheets of metal you have horn. So even creating these sort of secondary adornments to a weapon of war, you have these very sophisticated composite materials. You have jewelry, you've got probably a month's or even a year's worth of silver in that pommel. And just to top it off, you've got to have the very nice material qualities of horn, not just how it looks, with the opacity when you hold it up to some light. It has this very nice horn-like glow, but also when you eventually fit the whole sword together, these different parts, all of these materials will help you in different ways. And the sword that I selected, KAS 828, is a bit of an interpretation on my behalf. I am trying to keep to these original materials. All of their dimensions are the same, all of their structure is the same, but I thought if I use all of the materials that would have been available to the Anglo-Saxon craftsman, I can show off, especially as a teaching item. You can say all of these were available to the Anglo-Saxon, and these are what would have looked like on different parts of the sword. You have the bone, you have the wood, you have the horn, the silver, the bronze, and all of it stacks up together. Of course, I'll only touch very briefly on the scabbards, as I didn't have a chance to make one before the deadline of the assessment. But as I said earlier, these are thin wooden plates which are made to fit the sword very, very, very tightly. In looking at the thickness of these in the scanning electron microscope, they are almost 5 millimeters thick, which for someone working without power tools is very, very impressive. And on top of that, these are decorated in a very high fashion. They're not covered in silver or jewels as you might expect from the later medieval period. Instead, they are layered with different types of leather on the outside, with layers of braid and binding cords. And on image I, you can just about make out even the pattern of the cord that was woven and wrapped the scabbard, which I think is absolutely fascinating. On top of this, you have the facing of the sword on the interior of the scabbard, which was made up of a very soft type of leather or even skin with the hair still attached. And some of these include sheepskin, calf skin, or even beaver skin. And beaver skin is very interesting because, like with sheepskin, it has a waterproof compound which may help prevent rust on these blades, because you've got a waterproof compound which is not only creating this airtight seal, but also helping water out and preventing rust. So this is all starting to get very complicated, and we haven't even talked about putting it all together. We have 50 different materials worked in 50 different ways, all stacked on top of each other, all for a very specific function. Different types of wood selected for the scabbards depending on what you have locally available, but all of them filtered by their properties. A straight-grained, fast-growing wood like ash or hazel, for example, perfect for a scabbard because you only need to split it very roughly, and the straight grain of the wood carries the split all the way, and there you are, a 5-minute scabbard. But then on top of that, you've got the decoration, but also the binding cords that help hold it all together, because although the ancients did have different types of glues, horse glue for example, cow glue, over years that will degrade, and some of these swords were treasured as generational items because you have a skeleton from the 9th century buried with a sword from the 5th century, and that can only happen if that sword's been treasured and passed down from grandfather to son to grandson, all the way throughout. And then finally decided, we'll bury it with dear old dad. So this is the different parts of my production. We have the tail end of the sword, the tang. This is what will fit into the handle, and separated out nice and neatly from top to bottom. We have the pommel with the ring separate, and we have the upper guard, which has bone fitted with another silver plate. We have a handle fashioned from cherry wood, and at the bottom we have the lower guard, or the hilt, which is a piece of horn sandwiched in between silver plates, all riveted together. And historically, you would have a person called the cutler, who was in charge of assembling all of these items together, possibly buying them in from different workshops, which were streamlined to create sword blades or streamlined to create sword fittings, and he'd chuck them together, probably make you a handle on demand. If you're a bigger person, you'd have a bigger handle, small person, smaller handle, done differently, bespoke to the person, because these were the days before mass production. Very, very, very expensive items. If you're looking, again, the later medieval period, or even Roman documents, one of these swords could cost you years of your wages. Even materials alone, if you look at the amount of silver used in one of these swords, it is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds. And that's just without the labour in making these. So altogether, we have the finished sword. A textured grip for the handle, which was also found in some original archaeological examples at the start of the year. There was an early Saxon sword, roughly the same time, found just up by Canterbury and also featured on Digging for Britain, which had a textured fruit wood grip as well. And also the different materials, like I said earlier, are displayed differently on the sword. You can see that nice glow, that translucent glow of the horn with the shiny silver, and also that deep white or deep beige horn with the pommel to top it off. And that pattern welding on the sword blade is striking, not just because of how it looks, but also when you remember the different material properties of a composite material, it all starts to make sense. Everything here is for a reason. And if you remember how heavy I said this sword was, a very robust item, but elegant in its own right, it weighs about 1.6 kilograms in total. And a lot of these dimensions are faithful to the original, so that gives you quite a hefty chopper with the centre of gravity, the centre of balance quite far down the blade. So it almost feels more like an axe than it does a sword, like one of these medieval knight fencing weapons. No, this is a hack and slash, quite a brutal sword. And the handle's quite short as well. It's only about 10 centimetres long. And that's there for a reason, because it locks your hand in. You don't want to strain your wrist by trying to use delicately a big heft of steel like this. It's there, you hold it like a hammer, and you go and fight some magical demons like in Beowulf. This is what it's here for. In fitting these is also quite interesting. It would have been the responsibility of the cutler. A lot of these are done without glue and still remain without glue in the KAS teaching collection, and they're all fitted by friction. You can burn a wooden handle in, but also horn is interesting because horn is ever so slightly compressible and elastic. So when you hammer it down, the tang of the sword, it will give ever so slightly to make sure you have a tight fit. And of course, you have the trade evidence from not just the individual items, but also in the alloying. You know, saying we'll get a bit of this added to our local materials, and we have a composite product. And what's quite interesting is the balance of where all of these items come from. This is at the top we have a later image of a Viking trade map, all originating in Sweden and spreading all throughout Europe and even further abroad. But a recent study has found out where the chemical markers of this high quality steel used in the pattern welding originate from, and it's hypothesized that they were trading in or bought them themselves all the way from Afghanistan and northern India. So that's quite a way to trek for a good piece of steel. It shows you just how important these items were to them. And of course, you may know about the garnets that are found in some of the British Museum Anglo-Saxon objects. They will all come from India and Sri Lanka, or even glass, which still had to be obtained from remnant parts of the Roman Empire in modern day Greece and Turkey, or little workshops left in continental Europe. So these are absolutely massive undertakings. They must have involved dozens or hundreds of people in one item, and it shows the breadth of knowledge created just to produce a sword. Going back to experimental archaeology, some of this you can find from re-examining an object just by scientifically studying them, but like the fitting of the object or the handling the object, created as if it were brand new, you can start to revise your interpretations of them. And of course this is brilliant for a museum because you have something you can actually hand to people. As long as it's not a razor sharp sword, people who walk in can pick them up and say, oh, this feels different to what I was shown on TV, or what I was led to believe when I was taught about the Saxons in school as a kid. This is a little bit different, but it's nice that you get this revised image of them, that these certainly were not the Dark Ages of Europe or England. These are very sophisticated, very well-travelled craftspeople. And now, thank you everyone. That is the end of my presentation. I'll go back so you can see my face. If you have any questions, you can either write them in the chat or put your hand up and speak to me. Thank you very much.
Alex, thank you so much. Thank you. That was absolutely wonderful. What incredibly detailed work you do. What an insight into the practice and thinking of those early medieval craft workers. So, as Alex said, if you do have any questions, please can you add them to the chat, and I will read them out for you. Or if you would like to ask yourself, then you're welcome to put up your hand and we can unmute you. So, it's phenomenal to see the intricate detail involved in each individual sword and the work required for one piece. And the extent of those trade networks is something else, really. I have seen your replica close up. I'm very fortunate, and it is a wonderful thing. Really great. I think also, obviously, as you say, making it gives you that different aspect, but even just, holding a sword of that kind of caliber gives you a different feel for how those people would have experienced that. Now, you touched on this a little bit, but are we looking at a team of craftspeople working on the individual parts of each sword, do you think? Or do you see more specialists, a single specialist doing the complete piece with just assistants to help here or there? I know you mentioned hundreds of people being involved, but is that just more relating to procuring materials and the trade and ideas and stuff? Or, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that we can never be truly certain of because they didn't leave their signatures behind, or make a stamp like they did in Roman times or even the medieval times. We do have to sort of interpolate a little bit. there is only so much one person can achieve in their lifetime. You spend your whole life learning how to treat iron, you're a blacksmith. That's, a big enough job of itself. You can reference the medieval period. You have specialized-ish mini workshops which get more and more commercial, more and more industrialized as time goes on. At this period, you don't have the industries that the Romans did, or so we thought. So it does make you wonder how much of this is being done by one person and how much is said, oh, can't be bothered to do that, let's buy it in from Canterbury down the road.
Sure, be a whole team of folks when they're just too
Probably,
much to
yeah.
do. I mean, if they're getting busy,
Yeah.
like us all, right?
What if
Um,
Christmas down the road?
yeah. Maggie Sims said during the talk, she said, "Is it just me, or does the that sees the Sarre sword pommel with the amber glass eye as a reptile head?" And then it started a bit of a chat. Someone else said Sue said they thought they saw a bird's eye, but looking at it again, they see the snake, and it was a very subtle design.
Yeah.
So,
I don't
what do
think,
you,
well, the glass itself is quite flat or very lightly raised, but it's a recurring theme in Anglo-Saxon swords to have, or or Anglo-Saxon jewelry, to have these zoomorphic designs, which are partly geometric, partly animal-like or inspired. But the glass itself is just flat.
okay. David Hinch has asked, how do Jutish, Anglian, Frankish, and Frisian swords differ?
I did have a quick look through some more well-preserved continental examples. I think this is just because on the continent you have so many more swords. At least some of them have got to be in a better condition. But it's very much the same. There are slight differences, especially on the pommels. And like I said, these are the very personal, expressive pieces of the jeweler or the silversmith, which are creating these little things which they could probably make in separate to the sword, give to the craftsman and say, there you are, tap that on the end, give me 50 barrels of wheat, and that's a good deal, or something like that. So the main difference is just in the pommel.
Okay. Jan Moranan has asked, what would you like to make next?
That's a very good question. Probably another one which I can keep to myself. Or if you keep your an eye out on my Etsy shop, you might see one there soon.
There you go, little plug. Nice. Julie Berger Martin has asked, do you think the lanolin, lanolin, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, in the sheep fleece inside the scabbard was used to keep the sword from rusting?
That is a very good question because one thing which you can't quite tell from a scanning electron microscope, unless you've got an absolute expert, is if that skin is treated or untreated. The problem with an untreated skin, it will still have the lanolin, which is the compound, the waterproofing compound, but an untreated skin might start to break down to gunkify as it rots, and you don't want that on your sword. But if you have a treated skin, that will last a lot longer, but you're going to have to reapply grease on top of that.
Gunkify, there's a word I didn't think
Yeah.
I'd hear today. um, all right, Liz has asked, can you distinguish between a sword made for fighting use and a more ceremonial use by the blade alone?
Probably, yeah. Mostly depending on how it feels, how heavy it is. Using medieval examples, which we know are ceremonial or which we know are only for combat. The ceremonial ones are just highly impractical. You can't hold it properly. It either feels like an axe where you just can't lift it up at all, or it feels like a toothpick and you're like, oh, this will just brush someone in the face if you hit them with it.
Julie has asked, we recognise a Faversham school for Anglo-Saxon brooches. Is there a recognised Kentish style for swords?
Well, funnily enough, there is both a Sarre and a Bifrons designation of Anglo-Saxon pommels. Maybe not a Kentish style for the swords, is that the sword blades or the overall sword? But for the pommels, there is a lot of local variety in these. And if you read that Archaeological Cantiana volume from the 1860s something, they get very excited talking about, oh, this is a brand new type of pommel. Probably some to the museum, some in my pocket. That's how it goes with the Victorians.
Yeah. Oh well, at least we have our own special named types though. So they maybe turn up in someone's attic at some point, and we can learn more from those. Huh?
Yeah,
Uh,
hopefully my attic.
Robert has said Huskarls used to fight in pairs. With these swords, do they require specialized training and diet to use? And would it have been better these warriors fighting singly or in pairs?
Well, early Anglo-Saxons, very early Anglo-Saxons, are more Germanic at these times rather than the Anglo-Saxons, which you get more documentary evidence from. So, as counterintuitive as it seems, I think you're going to get more information from stuff like Beowulf than you are from the Anglo-Saxon books, mostly because this is the ideal warrior. He has a very close relationship with his lord and goes out to seek victory, whether it's hunting for treasure or just taking someone's head on a one-on-one battle. These communities in the early Anglo-Saxon times were very, very, very small. A small village with a local chief, probably not even housecarls until the 7th, 8th, 9th century at the earliest. So it probably would have been a career warrior,
Okay,
someone who was bred for this position or with a significant amount of training.
thank you. Graham Roach has asked, what shape is the hole that is bored into the handle? As this has to take a tapered tang, and any expansion of the wood, one would think, would lead to detachment and use.
Yep, that is a very good question. One of the problems I had with trying to put the handle on this sword was the different shape of the tang, and it's actually a very, very wide tang. So you get a very thin handle, which means you're sort of limited in options. It's either the handle's going to be too big to hold, or you've got to carve it just right so that you don't break through the wood, which I almost did a few times. But then again, it's a friction fit. If you burn it on, heat the tang up, tap the wooden handle on, you have a very good, very reliable fit. You just have to make sure the wood is dried out fully beforehand. And if you want to keep it that way, nice layer of linseed oil or something like that keeps it that way.
Thank you. I hope that uh, answered that question. Um, Robert has asked, would the beaver skin come from beavers in the Great Oak Wood of Andred, or say Kent Sussex border, say Tunbridge on the Medway and Bodiam on the estuaries, such as the Rother? Do you
I
know where the
think
beaver skins came
I don't know about the paleo environment of beavers, but all I know is probably would have had a lot more because there was a lot of beaver hunting in the 17th, 18th, 19th century for pelts for rich people. I did manage to get a hold of my beaver from Poland, which is one of
Wow.
the only places where you can legally farm them
Okay.
because they're still under conservation in England.
Sure. Keep our English beavers safe.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
okay. I just got oh well, I'll just ask this, Robert's just asked, when you say career warrior, can this also be Germanic or Anglo-Saxon professional mercenaries, as much Byzantine silver, circa AD 660 to 750 in Anglo-Saxon coins?
Well, I think there was a lot of mercenaries in early Anglo-Saxon England because that's why the Romans had the trouble with them when the empire was falling. They had too many mercenaries to fight off the Picts and the Britons, and they couldn't pay them enough. So it would make sense that some of these started to settle, maybe sent word back saying, look, there's an opportunity to make a lot of money, there's a lot of land, it's an undefended country, come on in.
Yes, and then we know what happened next. I'm going to ask you a couple of quick questions just out of my ignorance, all right? But
Yeah.
and then we'll wrap up, I think. Sorry, but I was just intrigued by the sort of complex design and the varied material and the intricate elements of every single sword that's there, and its kind of wealth in material. Um, does that suggest like it might not be expected to see much use? Because I mean, that seems like a lot of work and a lot of money to go into battering somebody every week. It would maybe does it suggest that the warfare wasn't quite as endemic as we imagined, and it's a rarer occurrence, or do you think they probably just thought, well, if I lose it, it means I'm dead, so it doesn't matter either way?
That is the $1 million question. Of course, you look at the beauty of these items and you go, yeah, there's no way that was used. But you pick it up and you go, if I had to, if push comes to shove, it will work. But here is an interesting fact that someone did. They did a survey of Anglo-Saxon graves with weapons in them, and they also looked at the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, and they looked at the date for each of these graves and the dates for battles, and they saw there was a inverse correlation between the amount of battles and the amount of weapons in graves. So when you have a decade of graves with lots of weapons in them, you have no battles. When you have battles in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, there are no graves with weapons in them. So it's almost like they've got this romantic obsession with weapons that, oh, my grandfather fought in this battle, he won a load of honor, he won a few farms, I'm going to carry a sword like him. And then you die without ever seeing a battle in your life.
Sure,
The
sure.
inverse happens, you do the opposite.
Or yeah, or maybe they're thinking, oh, oh dear, we might be in trouble here. Keep all the weapons handy, bury them. Um, So my last question, I promise, it was just that, following from that, like if perhaps all that material wealth and design intricacy has gone into it, maybe there's a kind of a more spiritual element there, and the whole creation of these things is certainly for the prehistoric period. I've always thought, is this, are the people making it uh, are they considered spiritual because of the transformation of materials, the incredible sight of bronze being smelted, and all those kind of things? Do you see that in any of the as you've been making it? Do you see it could be a some sort of spiritual connection there with the items?
I think there's always going to be a little bit of that. There was a Frankish text that I found, the only one I could find, which talked about a reference of pattern welding, and they called it the snake and the sword.
Hmm.
That's the only bit of evidence we have in text of them. So you don't know whether you can take that with a pinch of salt, whether it is just a poet writing about it. But obviously, when you don't fully understand a technology, there is more spirituality involved. It may almost be black magic. But then you speak to a blacksmith who's been doing it for 70 years and can barely stand it. Oh, I've been doing it all my life. What do you think it is? It's magic? No, it's all my hard work. You might get some of
Yeah,
that.
right. Yeah, okay, I can see that as well. All right. Well, Alex, thank you so much. That was absolutely incredible. Really great talk. And if you want to see Alex's work, check out his Etsy store, and also, come down to Maidstone Museum because we have plenty of his work in the museum and at the society, and we'd be glad to show you. So thank you all very much for attending. Thank you, Alex, for the incredible exploration of Anglo-Saxon worlds through material culture. We do have lots more coming up, so please do keep an eye out for our upcoming talks. In December, we will hear from Dr. Christopher Monk on food at Rochester Priory, what was baked, brewed, butchered, and cooked in the 13th century. Dr. Monk will be turning the pages of the Rochester Customel, shedding light on food production and consumption of the community of monks and their lay servants at St Andrew's Priory, Rochester. In January, Jason Hulot, chief instructor at Canterbury Medieval Combat, will be exploring knife violence during the 14th to 16th century in Europe, highlighting the dual roles of knives as practical tools and weapons of violence, covering reports from major English cities, as well as his own research into murders and knife crime in medieval Canterbury. We do have talks penciled in for February, and in March we hope to welcome Canterbury Archaeological Trust to give us an update on the incredible Iron Age and Roman site at East Weir Bay, just depending on that. And in April, James Dickinson will deliver The Ancient City of Canterbury, dealing with the history of the city from Roman times up to the end of the Middle Ages, particularly concentrating on Canterbury's role as a centre of pilgrimage, given the murder there of Archbishop Thomas Becket in 1170 before the High Altar. So the fantastic histories continue, and they are, of course, as always, for free. And if you'd like to give a talk for the society, please do just get in touch. As I mentioned earlier, if you're not a member, you can think about joining us. It works out about £3.30 a month, and for that you'll receive our journal, our biannual magazine, regular newsletters, exclusive access to our collections, conferences, and selected events, opportunities to get involved in excavations and research projects, and everything Kent heritage. Check the website for more details on these talks and a wide range of other upcoming Kent-based events, as well as how to become a member if you are interested. That's it for me. Thank you again, Alex. Really appreciate the talk, and we shall see you all again next time. Thank you very much. Good night.